Okay, so this is a TI99 4A. As many of you may have noticed in one of my previous videos, this was my TI9 or one of my TI99 4As, which was kind of in a bit of a disassembled state. And the reason for this is because there were three TI99 4As that I have. They all had various faults. And they shouldn't have, because most of the TI99 4A chipset is off the shelf. Even the big 16-bit processor there is off the shelf. It should be much more reliable than they are, but they are actually quite fragile. Now, the TI99 4A is one of the machines that I actually looked at when I was younger, when I was a child basically. And I think in the end I actually settled for an Atari. I think it was an Atari 400 at the time, simply because it was an oddball machine. Aesthetically it was a bit strange really, compared to all these science fiction blacks that there were out there in the machine. This was a machine with a lot of bling, a lot of chrome, a lot of bright silver, and it kind of stood out, and maybe not for the right reasons. Now the TI99 and the 4A gets a bit of a rough deal, especially as far as the annals of history goes, and I think it's slightly unfair. One of the biggest criticisms about it was that it was a little different to the rest of the kind of micro industry that was around there, and a little different to all the other micros that were around there, because it did use a 16-bit processor. And also it was different in the way it was put together. The keyboard wasn't brilliant, but it was, for the day, it was a keyboard, and it was a proper full travel one, not a rubber keyed sort of mismatched, dead fleshy kind of feeling thing. But the biggest issue with the TI99 was the fact that it got very little support. It got very little support from third-party software manufacturers, because Texas tried to keep everything in-house. And that kind of killed the deal, really, because the TI99 was actually a much better machine than people often give it credit for, and it could have done a lot better, and it was a lot more advanced than a lot of the machines that are out there, especially the Commodore VIC-20, and it was a lot better spec machine than a lot of machines that were out there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cover not the downfall of the machine so much. We're going to cover a little bit of history with the machine as well, and I think the actual TI99 deserves better than its kind of write-up in history as being a failure, because it wasn't. For a start, at one point it had 35% of the micro slice of pie in the USA. 35% is a huge chunk. It also had a lot of innovative features. It had the very first system where, very similar to our USB, modern or more modern USB system, where peripherals had their own assigned addresses, their own signed buses, and their own assigned basically interrupt requests, etc. on the system. There was no drivers to install. There was no software to install to get the thing running. Whatever you plugged into it would work, because it was designed to be configured and auto-configure that way. And it was literally the forerunner to, what we think of as universal serial bus today. The other thing is the implementation of the way the circuitry was laid out on the board. It used off-the-shelf parts, much in a similar vein to the original PCs. from IBM. They were off-the-shelf components, and it used coprocessors for sound, and also to aid the graphics capability of the machine, because at the time it was quite ahead of a lot of the systems that were out there in terms of sound capability, graphics capability, and it was really majorly let down by its implementation of the lowercase, because it was only small uppercase letters that it produced instead of genuine lowercase letters. So an A, for example, would be a smaller A when you typed it in lowercase and a bigger A when you typed it in uppercase, rather than the two different characters that you would normally associate with upper and lowercase. But the machine itself, specification-wise, was quite good. It would have been nice to see the machine get developed into something a little bit more advanced, with the Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, Mark V, or whichever way they would have named it. But I'm afraid with the war he had with Commodore, or Texas had with Commodore, that wasn't really going to happen, because Commodore started doing price point matching on everything. They literally, as one person said at the time, they've ruined the microcomputer industry, because they cut their prices to such an extent that very few people could compete. Now, Texas sold 2.9 million TI99 4As, which isn't bad. Mostly in America. It wasn't really taken up a lot in Europe, but there still was quite an evident market in Europe, and it didn't do as bad as some people made out. But the software side of it was the main bugbear, because Texas didn't release any real information on the machine, which made developing software almost impossible unless it was done in-house. So, specification-wise, it had 16K of VRAM. It ran on TI Basic. It had a 48 key QWERTY keyboard with mechanical springs. The processor was a TMS9900, and it ran at 3.3 megahertz. The video, depending on region, was a TMS9918A or a TMS9928A. And they also did another version, a TMS9929A for CCAM. The resolution was 256 by 192, or 64 by 48, or 32 by 24, 16 colours available, and 24 lines of 32 columns. The interface was one cartridge, one expansion port, one composite monitor out, one cassette interface, and one joystick, which wasn't compatible with the Atari, but a lot of people had adapters which would then run Atari joysticks. The power supply was external, so the basic machine could be tweaked for each market, whether it was PAL, CCAM, NTSC, and so on. Okay, the machine was released in the United States in 1981, and it cost $525 US, equivalent to roughly $1,500 in current sort of financial times. Okay, so it was an enhanced version of the TI99-4, and it was improved with a better keyboard and a better video chip. Okay, so but also this machine had hardware supports for sprites, multi-colors, and multi-channel sound, and it had custom coprocessors to allow it to do it, which took the actual load off the main processor. The processor itself was a 16-bit TMS9900 16-bit processor, and it was one of the really could have been one of the first 16-bit computers, but it was kind of hobbled by an 8-bit address line. So it was much in the same vein as the Sinclair QL was a few years later. That was a 16-bit machine hobbled by an 8-bit address system again. So they weren't the first company to do that, but the processor ran at 3 megahertz, and it was based on the TI990 mini computer. The video display processor was a TMS9918 for the American market and the TMS9918A. And also in the European PAL system, it was replaced with a TMS9929A, which also is the same one that was used in MSX machines. So the expansion options were quite good because it had a system where the expandability of the machine actually had modules or expansions that plugged into the side of it, and then you can daisy chain one after another, and they were basically an early form of, well, really USB is probably the closest way of explaining it, where you can USB serial, where you can plug in devices and they would automatically be assigned the correct addresses and so on to make them work. Well, the TI99 had the same or similar system where each device didn't need drivers or needed to be configured. It was automatically assigned addresses and interrupts, etc., to make the device work. So you didn't really have to do anything at all apart from turn it on. But they found out that the daisy chain method was a little bit clunky, and it could induce lockups because of all of the connections. So they produced an expansion box, which kind of looked like the back of a modern or a more modern PC with its slots in the back where you put your graphics cards and so on. And it was kind of the reverse of that, where all of the peripherals would go in the box and then you could stand your monitor on top. But as we said, it's seen as a failure, but it's not really, because, as I say, it sold nearly 3 million models, and it was much better than a lot of the models and machines that were out there. Third-party development kind of let it down, which is a bit of a shame. So there were only really about 100 commercial games released, which compared to a lot of machines was just a blip. It was nothing when you think of the thousands that were released for other platforms, which included the Commodore machines and the Apple machines, etc. So in that kind of vein, it didn't do so well. But because the war with Commodore and its pricing brought the machine down to $99 at one point, which was an insane price for a machine that started off at 5 times that amount. But because they were trying to compete with Commodore, not sure if they realised that Jack Tramiel was really getting back at them for almost bankrupting him when they decided to cut the price of their own chips and processors that went into calculators, but not pass it on to companies like Commodore at the time, who were also making calculators. So they effectively priced them out of the market, and that's basically what Jack Tramiel did to Texas Instruments over the machine. And most people think that's the legacy of this machine. It was a complete and utter failure, but it wasn't. There are still vibrant user groups, even in the UK, going for this machine. We've been going nearly 30 years or more, some of them, and they're still active today. And when you actually use the machine, all of your kind of preconceptions about it seem to vanish, because when you turn the machine on, it's slightly more user-friendly than what most of the machines at the time were. You know, you plug a cartridge in, you turn it on, it asks you quite politely if you want to run the cartridge or you want to run it into basic. It quite politely gives you the option of what you want to do. So unlike Commodore 64, for example, you put the cartridge into the machine and it automatically runs the cartridge. You know, there's no queuing system to find out what you want to run, and it doesn't even bother allowing you some kind of input to run whichever basic or the cartridge that you want to run. So it was an early pioneer, and the machine itself was not as bad as what the critics and the articles make you believe it was, because it was a lot better than that. The graphics were certainly a lot better than the VIC-20. The 3-voice sound chip was on par, if not slightly better, than the Commodore VIC-20, although it did use a square wave generator. And the games were generally on par with the emerging machines which were coming out with the Commodore 64 and then the Sinclair Spectrum and so on. So they were at least on par with that. And the use of their 16-bit processor could have meant that their next machine could have been full 16-bit, because they were already using that CPU in the TI-99. And then they could have brought a 16-bit machine out a lot earlier than maybe Commodore did or Atari did. And they could have gained another foothold in a different market. But it may have also been backwards compatible because they would have been using the same processor. So some of the software would have been backwards compatible. And that could have opened a whole new dimension as well. There's a lot of what ifs with this machine, and it's a shame it was killed off. And it was a shame it was eventually put to bed because of bad planning on the half of Texas, who thought that they could make the low cost of the machine up on peripherals and software. They misjudged the market entirely. And also, as we said, Commodore's intervention in trying to wipe out Texas Instruments as a computer manufacturer. Right, so this is the end of really what was an audio book of the TI-99 4A's history, and in the next video we're going to go through some of the ways that the TI-99 differed, including the games, the cartridge system, the graphics, and you know, there'll be more of a visual feast on this one. But as I said, there was quite a lot to get into for this video, but as I say, it was more of an audio book, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me on the next episode about the TI-99 4A. Thank you for listening, and if you like what you've heard or seen, please subscribe. If not, have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.